Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Teena Jha, you're watching Perspective. Women-led development has been one of the key priorities of India's G20 presidency. With the belief that when women prosper, the world prospers, India adopted an approach to mainstream gender into G20 discussions, recommending urgent action to mitigate gender inequalities, adopting a sector-specific approach to target and improve female workforce participation, and unlock the potential of finance in advancing the women-led development agenda. At the G20 Summit, leaders reaffirmed that gender equality is of fundamental importance and that investing in the empowerment of all women and girls has a multiplier effect in implementing the 2030 agenda. The question is, what decisive action will now be required to realize the G20's goal of bridging gender gaps? Also, how can various institutions and frameworks such as the P20 help in achieving the core priorities of the women-led development agenda? All this and much more in this edition of Perspective, with two distinguished guests joining us virtually on the program today. I'm delighted to welcome Ms. Sunaina Kumar, Senior Fellow at ORF, and she's also the Executive Director, Think 20 India Secretariat. Also, we are joined by Ms. Shaifalika Panda. She's Convener, G20 Empower Working Group for Mentorship. Thank you to both of you for joining us on the program today on Sansad TV. Ms. Kumar, let me begin the program today with you. We've seen how women-led development has been one of the key 6 priorities of India's G20 presidency. But for the benefit of us and our viewers, give us a sense of what really has been India's vision and idea of women-led development.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me for this discussion. Thank you also for talking about this issue, which I think is really important. Before I go into what has been India's vision, I think it's also really important to understand why gender became the top agenda for India's G20 presidency, right? The why before the how. And I think the why is a lot about the moment that we find ourselves in globally, the fact that we were coming out of a pandemic, that in the last 3 years, we've seen multiple crises, climate crisis, conflict, leading, of course, to food security issues, cost of living and inflation. And all of these interconnected crises have had an impact which has been borne much more by women than on men. And another effect of this has been that the progress that the world was making over the last decade on sustainable development has been reversed, from women's economic empowerment to even maternal and child health. Things that globally were improving have slowed down or reversed. So when India took on the presidency, these factors were very important. Also, what was important was the fact that India has its own problem with a very wide gender gap, which we do have to acknowledge, right? The fact that we've not been able to bring enough women into the workforce, the fact that our rankings in the Global Gender Gap Report have been consistently low. So with all this was the realization that this is a very urgent topic. And G20, which generally is a forum for talking about inclusive growth and things like progressive tax and investments and economic reforms, can actually really make an impact on gender. And when we say inclusive growth, we have to talk about women. So adopting what has been a gender dividend approach, looking at women as an untapped resource who have a multiplier effect on the economy. There is a lot of data that shows that India's GDP can go up by 27% in the next few years if women's workforce participation can be increased. So between that and the fact that when women are made financially independent, they invest back in the education and health of families and communities. So the force multiplier effect that women have on development, on economies, is what led us to this moment of women-led development.
It's very interesting to see how when we talk about women-led development, it's not just women as beneficiaries, it's women as leaders, as equal participants. And towards achieving that, Ms. Panda, if I may come to you and understand, what is the G20 Empower Alliance doing to accelerate women's empowerment on the one hand, but what's also primarily important is to have them in leadership roles, particularly in the private sector?
Clearly, at the start of India's G20 presidency, the Prime Minister put the focus on moving from women's development to women-led development. The fact that we are now going to take these ladies who were earlier beneficiaries and make them leaders in their own agenda, because no one knows better than them the challenges they face and how they feel it is best to overcome those challenges. And both, if you look at the G20 Empower as well as the W20, there were a lot of common factors in there. And the G20 Empower had three themes. One was education, ways to empower women through education. The second was entrepreneurship, keeping in mind the status of equity and economy for women. And the third was leadership at the grassroots level. But another extremely important factor for this was to have digital skills and technology as a cross-cutting issue. And therefore, when we worked through the year under G20 Empower, we, was set up into 5 working groups, handling each of these, and digital inclusion, financial inclusion, mentorship, STEM, and corporate women's empowerment. I think there was huge progress and a lot of consensus in the conversations with all the delegates, because women's issues across countries are actually the same. Yes, it is true that, maybe given our statistics, given the size of our population, yes, we have a statistic skewed against us, that, we have more inequity in India. But there are many other countries that have an equal amount of inequity. And they all resonated with the fact that if we provide digital skills to women, if we provide mentorship to women, and we also give them the best practice playbooks, which are all concrete outcomes of the G20 Empower, then it is going to go a long way in enabling women to have higher progression and higher empowerment towards the economy and the growth of their nations.
We are delighted to hear that India's approach gained significant traction, Ms. Kumar, among the G20 leaders. But if I may now try and understand from you about the kind of commitments that the G20 leaders actually agreed to when it comes to fostering economic empowerment of women worldwide.
Yes. Absolutely. So I think what has happened within G20 is that gender commitments have slowly gained traction. We've had a few landmark years, the formation of G20 Empower, as Shaifalika is representing the Women 20, the 25 by 25 commitment in Australia to increase labor force participation of women. But what India's G20 did was really to bring all of these into the heart of every policy discussion that took place during this entire year. And I think there was, amongst those of us who were working, just this concern that we've done this through the year and we've done a great job of coming together and talking about it. And will the leaders' declaration be able to deliver? And it did. I think that it has done more for emphasizing and prioritizing gender than any other declaration by any other country before. So it stayed within the G20 ambit, of course, which has been about improving women's labor force participation, access to decent pay, equal wage. But it also went beyond that with a few ideas that were pitched big and pitched heavily. And I think some of those ideas that have come through would be, women's leadership and decision making across the board in the private sector, at the grassroots level, in political systems, and in governance. And also promoting women's role in climate change, in food security, and nutrition. So the Leaders' Declaration very emphatically talks about how important women are to it. And I think in terms of outcomes, the big outcome that has come out of the declaration is the formation of the working group on women's empowerment.
Right.
And why a working group is really important is the fact that the nature of G20 is such that it is rotating from one presidency to the other. What a working group can do is ensure that priorities that are listed by one country can be continued and taken up by another country, and monitoring the implementation of those. So the working group that India has been able to form, which is going to have its first meeting in Brazil next year, is going to be very crucial in taking forward many of these ideas that were there in the leaders' declaration.
Right. So we hope there will be continuity as far as India's ideas are concerned into the next presidency that is under Brazil. But the next big question, Ms. Panda, is on the implementation bit. We've taken the one big step. We've achieved consensus on a lot of these ideas about how the world needs a gender equal world. We need to have a women-led development approach. The next question, of course, is going to be on how to act upon realizing these goals. How do you think institutions like the P20 is supposed to meet next week in New Delhi, the presiding officers of parliaments of all G20 members, also the invitee nations will attend the deliberations, and there will be a session on women-led development as well. How do you see institutions like the P20 helping in realizing the vision and the commitments set at the G20 Leaders Summit?
I think it's very important for institutions like the P20 to carry this conversation forward, given that we want that this agenda is continuous in motion and therefore brings that outcome that we're looking for. Clearly, they're going to have to push the conversation across various spheres of implementation with digital technology, with finance, climate action, and of course, including the food security. Because until and unless everybody continues the stakeholder collaborative engagement setup, I don't believe that we're going to be able to keep this momentum going, and that is what is the most important part. So there should be regular meetings like this, which involve all stakeholders to come together, put agendas and further agendas on the table, and keep the momentum going.
Ms. Sunaina Kumar, the fact that when we talk about implementation, there are also challenges. So perhaps we'll have to, have broad-based systemic changes at different levels. For example, if we talk about India itself, there are some societal, some structural changes that will be required in the times to come. So indicating that it not just requires a whole of government approach, but a whole of society approach when we talk about a women-led development approach, because it's also about changing mindsets at some level. So what is the approach going to be going forth if we particularly talk about India in bringing about that change in mindset? Our vision is 2047, 25 years from now we see women in that crucial role, but time is very less to bring about the change in mindset.
So I think, Teena, what you said about the whole of society approach is an oft-cited term that we constantly use when we talk about gender equality.
Right.
The fact that we need the private sector and we need every possible stakeholder to be pitching into this. But I think that, and to really refer back to the question that you asked before this to my fellow panelists, which was about Parliament 20, right? And I think that's something that I do want to emphasize at this point. The fact is that we know that all of this cannot really be left for society to achieve on its own. And in that, what we need is political commitment. We need legal and policy frameworks.
Right.
And I think that it's sometimes interesting to look at maybe case studies of countries that have done this, because, it also shows that it is achievable. It is not a problem that cannot be solved. So, for example, a country like Rwanda, which is from the global south, right? We're not looking at a Scandinavian country. Now, this is a country which in the last 20 years, from the brink of being from genocide, has actually become one of the most gender equal countries in the world. Women are, it is just basically a global example of women participating in government, in parliament, in business, and leading. So I think it is possible for a country to achieve this, and it is definitely possible for India. And I do want to say that because we are on Sansad TV, the very fact that Parliament 20 is coming up, but also the fact that we have passed a law to reserve seats for women is actually a big step in the direction of women-led development. And we only also have to look at the experiment that we've had with women at the grassroots level in India, right? Which, of course, is often perceived in the broad strokes of women being proxy candidates and male figures, brothers and husbands stepping in. But there also have been a lot of positive outcomes that have come from reserving seats for women, which we can see now 30 years later, backed by evidence. And I think that this is also where reservation for seats for women will take us in the parliament as well.
Ms. Panda, do you think the fact that India having walked the talk when we say we want women in leadership positions, we want women in decision-making roles, so by ensuring that we're creating a level playing field, at least at the legislative level, 33% reservation to women, that is something that is going to inspire the world in ensuring a more inclusive and gender-neutral society?
Oh, absolutely. Before I actually answer that specific question, I just want to highlight that India has also been a huge example with their SAG models through G20. And, of having 10 crore women touching that mark, being, nano entrepreneurs, micro entrepreneurs, and gaining from that is an example to all, not just the G20 countries, but to everyone. And that was something that was highlighted through the G20. Similarly, India taking the first step with the women's reservation bill. And this, don't forget, comes also with what Ms. Kumar mentioned. We have had success at the panchayat levels, with a 40+ percentage of women representing themselves there. This is going to be a game changer for India, which has been, in the waiting for a while, and also put us once again on the world map to say, let's learn from this example that India is making and, take it forward. We had a similar thing when we also put forward the CSR policy, which also works towards, not just social factors, but highlighting specifically on women. So I think this is going to be great for India, and it is going to be a super example for the world.
Ms. Kumar, you earlier on said how, when we talk about a gender-inclusive society, something that India has, clearly paved the way for other countries to also follow by including more and more women in decision-making roles. But how do we ensure coordination? When we say multi-pronged approach, there are bound to be gaps, and we need to plug in those gaps.
So, well, I think one of the learnings this year has also been that, the G20 process is so much about about the presidency that precedes and the presidency that you hand over, and you try to build a continuity process. And the very fact that we have developing countries at the helm also means that it works to our advantage. So a lot of issues that we want to work on together can be taken up in tandem, as they were by Indonesia, by India, by Brazil further, and South Africa. So, and again to say that the very fact that we have a leaders' declaration that delivers on gender commitments does not really mean that we have achieved those gender commitments. But that is also the limitation of the forum itself. What we have managed to do is legitimize and prioritize a lot of important concerns and issues, create momentum for change, and also begin the process of reform and adoption of policies. I would say that one of the ways that we think that continuity or outcomes will be ensured is, in fact, the working group that has been formed for gender empowerment. I think that has been a very effective takeaway.
I think we'll all wait to see how Brazil, continues with the kind of efforts that India has undertaken. But beyond that, to bridge digital gender divide, Ms. Panda, if I may come to you and understand, digital is the way forward. Of course, we've seen how digital revolution has transformed lives in India particularly. We now want to share those benefits with the rest of the world. Our vision has been one world, one family, one future. But when we say challenges, they differ from society to society. So how are we going to deal with that, especially when we say we need to fast-track implementation? The 2030 agenda is something that is in our target. So how do we approach that? What is the roadmap going to be for that?
See, as you mentioned, that India has made huge strides in, the digital space. The two highlighted factors for G20 Empower were the tech equity, which is the digital inclusion platform, and WEP Mentor, which is, of course, the mentorship platform, again, an online platform. The key to all this is that we've kept it extremely simple, and the focus is also to include, the MSMEs and the grassroots leaders.
Right.
The huge challenge is how to mobilize the women at the grassroots level, because they have an issue of access to a device, access to infrastructure, etc. So I think we're going to have to address this in different ways. One is to address the access issue. The second is to address the skills issue for it. And that is where I believe that, all stakeholders need to come together. Everybody needs to play their part with regard to infrastructure, with regard to skills, with regard to, creating a framework which can bring everybody on board and have them access all these various initiatives that are available to them. And that will then allow us to, reach out to the last mile through digital and hugely, create that platform to empower these women to reach out and connect with the world.
Absolutely. That's the kind of change that we would like to see, and we would like the world also to adapt to bring in more and more women into key roles, decision-making roles, and setting the agenda for development, not just in India, but we would like to see that happen in other countries as well, particularly the Global South. That has been one emphasis of India during its G20 presidency. And let's also hope that Brazil continues to carry forward some of the significant work that India has done as far as women-led development approach is concerned. Time allows me to take up only that much on the program today. I'd like to thank both my guests once again for joining me on this edition of Perspective and sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. To you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well. I'll see you same time tomorrow now. Take good care of yourselves. Keep watching Sansad TV.